Welcome everybody to our Cascading Growth events. I am joined today by the wonderful John Knights, who works with leadership, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I've learned so much from John over the years. Just to let you know that for those of you who are watching this later, Cascading Growth events is all about, as you can see on the slide, sparking courageous insights and collaborative synergy. And these events were born out of us as a team at Adaptus having conversations about the values that were important to us in our business. And we know that in so many of our conversations that talking about our values helped us to dig really deep about what this business is to us and what's important to us and what we really want to share more with other people, with clients and all the other people that we come in contact with, including our team and our facilitators. So the values, we actually revisited our values and we tried to look to hone our values. And what we came up with in refreshing these values was courageous insight, which was all about how we have to have the courage to know ourselves in order to be able to create safe workplaces, thriving workplaces, healthy workplaces. And that all starts with knowing ourselves and then spreading it out towards others. And collaborative synergy was the second one. And that's all about helping people to foster deep connections with themselves and with each other. And what we really want to do is expand our learning community, because we know that the greatest learnings come out of everyone working together and talking together. And then cascading growth and development by really encouraging us to have open, honest conversations. We can then cascade everything that we're learning and help everyone whose lives we touch to reach their true potential, which is what we're all about. And today, as I say, I'm joined by John Knights, and I'm just going to spotlight you there, John. And let's see what happens with me. I'm not sure. So just a very quick introduction to John, and then I'll pass over to you, John, to give us a little bit more insight. John and I met, I think it was in 2020. So it was during the first COVID lockdown. And it was a client, a leader I was coaching who introduced me to you, John, and to Danielle and Greg. And we all started, during COVID, when everybody was in lockdown, we started jumping on Zooms and all having these conversations. And it kind of grew from, I think, 6 or 7 of us to many tens of people and maybe hundreds eventually, who became part of the community. And we would talk about all sorts of things we were seeing in workplaces and leadership, and talk about how we could change the world, really. And through that process, getting to know John and Danielle and Greg, I was introduced and obviously got to know leadership much better. And then I ended up doing training in LEPA, which is a leadership styles and emotional intelligence 360 measurement that we now use at Adaptus with our clients, any opportunity we can. And it's a brilliant measurement. It helps us to really dig into how is each individual showing up as a leader, and where is their emotional intelligence at. And it gives us a sense of how people are operating as leaders and how their direct reports, peers, and their own managers and other stakeholders would wish them to show up at work. So it's really, really useful as a 360 emotional intelligence and leadership styles measurement. So and then John and myself, I think it was in 2022 maybe, or 2023, that John and I actually hosted a peer coaching group, and we ran that, John, I think for about a year, with about 6 other leaders. And we would meet, I think, every Friday. I'm trying to remember, was it every Friday or every second Friday? And we would peer coach, which was a wonderful learning experience, and helped me to get to know John better as my co-facilitator. And John has just so much incredible experience in the workplace, which he then brought into leadership, and has touched so many lives. And I can't wait to hear more. I've heard John's background and story, but I always get something new from it. So, John, I'm going to pass over to you. I'm going to stay quiet now. I would love you to share with our audience a little bit about your background and how you came to doing what you're doing today at Leadership Global, and anything else that you'd like to share within that.
Okay. So yeah, we have known each other quite a few years, and I'm really pleased and grateful that you've invited me for this chat to reach out to your network as well, which is really
Mm,
good. So
yeah.
my background is originally I was qualified as an engineer, and I was one of those post-war babies who had the opportunity to come from a working class background and be the first in the family to be educated to university level. But and I remember when I went to university, only 5% of people went to university, whereas now it's probably more like 40% or that order of magnitude. So it was really something special, and I was very lucky to have that opportunity. And I graduated as an engineer, but I quickly realized, well, even before I graduated, that engineering was not my forte, and that although I was good at maths and analysis, engineering was not really the thing for me. And so as I got into the corporate world, I moved to sales and eventually business management. And I was also very lucky to get an opportunity first in a major American organization in London, and then I moved to Sweden, where I worked for 5 years, and that was really interesting because they were quite advanced in management techniques, which were a more collaborative approach rather than a top-down approach, which was more American British type of way of doing things.
Mm,
And I was there for 5 years, and Sweden has always been since then a very important place for me. And I spent with my wife, my Swedish wife, we spend about 3 months a year there. Um, and then I got an opportunity to be promoted and moved to Holland, where I was in sales management for large construction projects, then to Singapore, and then to the States, and eventually became a vice president, corporate vice president of a Fortune 100 company. And then finally, in my corporate life, which lasted about 16 years, I think, I became a main board director of a FTSE 100 company in the UK. And then basically due to ethical reasons, which I won't go into here, but I felt that I couldn't continue in that organization. And within a year or two of me leaving, it actually got broken up. Um, so I decided then to become an entrepreneur, and I spent, my second career was maybe 15 years as an entrepreneur, um, starting up several companies, mainly in environmental technology. But most of what I did was the business side. Um, and then in 1998, I had the opportunity to learn to coach, which was a serendipitous thing. And actually, that changed my life because I suddenly realized that although I'd been quite successful, I'd been considered to be a good leader on balance. Um, there was so much about leadership that I didn't know. Um, and it was all about, the coaching aspect, the empathy, the being interested in other people, that side of thing. Whereas, my focus had always been on getting the business done, and people will follow, and so on and so forth. Um, and when I look back and I think that some of the things I did and some of the feedback I got, I remember the first 360 I did, and the feedback I got was that I was intimidating and I didn't care about people. Now I knew that I cared about people, but what I realized was that I wasn't feeding it back. I wasn't telling people that I cared, and therefore the fact that I cared wasn't having the impact it should have had. And the fact that I was intimidating, I didn't know that either, and so I had to really do something about those things. And I think one of the first things that we need to learn as human beings, but as leaders specifically, is we have to get that self-awareness. We have to understand ourselves before we can start to change. And it was through that coaching and then the opportunity to work with a number of leaders, both in teams and individuals, that I realized that these leaders had the same kind of issues that I did. They may, they weren't necessarily the same kind of people, so they would operate in different ways, but basically it was about understanding themselves, and then making the attempt to how do I change myself, not change my personality, but change my behaviors so that I get the most out of my personality and my capabilities. And that was what basically led me to the third career, if you like, which was leadership development.
Yeah, and John, I think that's a really common story, isn't it? In the work that we do in coaching people, where they get that feedback and realize, as you say, well, I do care about people, or I do want the best for people, but we people realize I haven't been communicating it. And also going through coaching kind of can open up a whole new world to you of things that you weren't thinking about, because you were driving results and focused on the task, and then you realize, oh, there's so much more to helping people feel motivated and
Yeah.
engaged. Is that your story, your experience? Is that
Yes.
something that you've seen a lot of since?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've had the fortune of coaching, well, hundreds of people now, I guess, must be from around the world, and it, it's culture neutral, I might add, which is, it's the same issue, maybe to different levels and different extents, but it's basically the same issue the whole time. But the other thing is that
Mm-hmm.
beyond this self-awareness is, so how do I develop as a leader? How do I
Mm-hmm.
develop to the best leader I can be? And I think that we need more than pure coaching for that. I mean, I think pure coaching is really important, and it's an important part of helping a leader to develop. But I think there needs to be some sort of journey and a path for people to follow, and that's what we've been working on, well, for the last 20 years now, on
Mm.
developing something.
And tell us about that journey. Tell us a bit more about Leadership Global and the work that you and your colleagues have been doing.
Okay, so the way it started was in the early 2000s, when emotional intelligence was first recognized as a science, if you like. And I I read Daniel Goleman's book, the um, the Primitive Leader, at around that time. And what it made me realize was that emotional intelligence was really very important for the development of a leader. And so we tried to find, when we'd set up leadership, and even before that, we tried to find uh, individuals in the UK who were experts or knowledgeable about emotional intelligence. And we weren't very successful. So we took the decision that we'd try and become experts ourselves. um, and so what we did was we started to work with coaches. We had a team of coaches, a team of leaders that were very open to be used as an experiment, and they were sort of our laboratory. We had 3 of these groups, and they served as a laboratory for us to try things out about, on helping them develop their emotional intelligence, coming up with some ways of doing 360 assessments and so on and so forth. And that worked really well. And I remember I think one of the first programs that we sold to an external client was to Disney, in about 2004 or 2005.
Not
Um,
bad.
and yes, and and the feedback was very positive. So that gave us a lot of confidence, and we started to develop it further. And so over about 5 years, we developed this program of self-awareness, awareness of others, self-management, relationship management, to help people build their emotional intelligence, but in a leadership context. Because one of the first things that was really important was to understand what leadership was really about, and the difference between leadership and management and so on and so forth, which a lot of people kind of knew intuitively, but had never really focused on. But when it came, by the time of about 2007, what we also realized was that it was quite easy to use emotional intelligence to manipulate people. And therefore, emotional intelligence by itself was not enough. And we realized that what we had to do was we had to move into the field of ethics and morality and values. And so we kind of created this triple intelligence model of rational intelligence, which of course is what everybody needs to be good managers. You have to have some level of analytic capability and logical capability. But you also need the emotional intelligence, but you also need what we refer to as a spiritual intelligence as well. And that doesn't mean anything about religion or mysticism or whatever. It's basically about values. And so we created a program, which was something that took about a year, because we also found that a lot of clients, they wanted a sort of a 3-day program that would fix everything. And of course, when it comes to emotions and values, those things take time. They have to sink in. They need practice. You don't change your emotional behavior by knowing something. You have to actually do it, and you have to practice it over and over again. I mean, I've been working on my empathy for 20 years, and I'm still not at the end of the competition
journey.
yet. Yeah. So
competition.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of other things. I mean, if you take something like patience, if you want to become more patient, which is something something I've tried to do over time, it takes time. You have to practice, and you have to know how to practice. You can't just say, well, go and be more empathetic. You have to work out what are the granular aspects of how to do that, which takes time. And therefore, if you need to do a program over a period of time, so you have time to reflect and practice and then try it out. And the only way you can really move forwards is by trying things out in the workplace. So it's not the lecture that's going to do anything. And so our methodology is very much based on providing some information about a topic, getting a group of people to discuss it, preferably, or it may have to be one-on-one if it's only with a coach, but best with a team or a group. And then giving them the opportunity or the task even to practice it in the workplace. And then to feed back what they've learned. And then to discuss that and learn from each other.
And I think that's so important, because you have to be able to go back into work and practice things, try them out and see how they land. Because and often when you change your behavior, it doesn't feel right either to you or to the other person that you're trying it out with. And so then you go back to doing things as you always did them, because you didn't get positive or useful feedback. Yeah, that's why programs are so important.
You've got to rewire your brain, basically. Yes. And of course, a lot of people are nervous about doing that. What will that make me? How will that change? I don't want to change it. Well, it's not about changing your personality. I always, emphasize that. It's just about managing those behaviors around your personality so that you're the best you can be. And as a result of that, we've written a number of books, and of course, the latest book is Leading Beyond the Ego, which is the second edition now. It was just published last year, which is basically it's 20 chapters, and each one is a step towards that leadership, starting with, what is leadership about, going through the whole thing about emotional intelligence, how do I improve my emotions, and then looking at values. How do I use my values and my emotional intelligence in decision making? That's also really critical. And how do I look at my stakeholders? Because one of the things that's really important, if you want to be the best leader you can be, it's not only the responsibility you have towards your organization, is also the responsibility towards your stakeholders. Whether they're your customers or your suppliers or the local government or the planet. They're all very important that we consider those. And so we've always had the goal on our leadership development is to go beyond our own benefit. It has to be, and our own organization's benefit even, but it has to be for the greater good. If leadership is not thought of as something for the greater good, then it's losing its purpose.
And John, yeah, that's definitely been my experience of getting to know you all over the years and working with you is that you really are for the greater good. And if you're asked to be involved with something, you will find a way to be involved, at least one of you on the team, in order to serve the greater good. And I know that even in all the peer coaching that we all did together as a group, you gave up every Friday afternoon, even though you were telling us I need to kind of take a little bit of time out to spend more time with my wife and spend more time in Sweden, but yet you were still finding ways to give your time for the greater good, and I really appreciate that. And so I suppose, and I'm in knowing you and listening to you, I'm thinking about your particular values. Like, what are the values that have brought you through life and brought you to this point that have helped you navigate the world? Like, from my perspective, I think that you really bring care into what you do. I know that your family is important to you, and you put time in there, and also from getting to know you as well, you've mentioned some of them, but self-awareness and growth feel like very important values to you. And I know that you're very big, you've been on this journey, and you're, as you said yourself a few minutes ago, you're kind of continuing on this journey of learning. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about those values. And I mean, I've listed out a few that I know of you, and there's obviously lots of other ones that will be on your mind, and how they've helped you to navigate and get to this point, and maybe any challenges that have come up with those values.
Yeah. Well, I think the most important one is probably honesty. And I've luckily, although, as we all would criticize our parents for various things, the one thing that I certainly remember from particularly my mother, was she was honest, too honest sometimes, brutally honest. But it was something that she definitely instilled in me, that you had to tell the truth. And although I've learned over the years that sometimes it's actually better to be silent about the truth, that's very different than telling lies. So that was sort of the rock, if you like. And I think that one of the things that I was not very good at when I was younger, but I learned at university, probably during the industrial year, that I took a year out when I was at university to work in an engineering company, and suddenly realized that if you wanted to get on, you had to do things properly. And so doing things thoroughly was another sort of really important value for me from my early days. And sometimes I have to be careful that I don't become too much of a perfectionist in that, and spend too much time, doing the last 1%. But that's also, ground based in me. And I think the other thing that has really become more and more important is to be trustworthy, and to trust other people. I mean, trust is a two-way thing. We often think of trust being, just one way. You either give trust or get trust, but it's very much a two-way thing. And one of the things that I've learned as a leader is that if you trust people that work for you, you'll get much more productivity than if you don't trust them. So yeah, sometimes you make a mistake. You trust people and they weren't worth that trust. That happens occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, on balance, I think by trusting people and then allowing them to do their job with the support and help is the best way to go, and by far the most highly productive way to do it. In fact, I wrote a white paper on it not long ago about what's the missing element in productivity. We always talk about productivity being low and not increasing in the UK, Europe, etc., etc. The main reason, I think, is because of leadership is not getting the best out of people. It's not getting people to want to do their best, to make that extra effort, that voluntary effort. You give somebody an incentive and they'll work to the level they need to get the incentive. But if you inspire people and get people thinking about what their purpose is and so on and so forth, then you'll get that extra voluntary effort, which makes a big difference on productivity. So that would be a third one. I think that perhaps values that are not necessarily thought of as being leadership values, the core, if you ask, what are the most important values, people will always come up with honesty, excellence, and trustworthiness. They'll come up with those. And integrity. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But there are lots of other values that are really important, and they're important in order to get the best out of our own personality. So I'm an impatient person, so patience is actually a really important value for me. That I need to work on being patient and not getting upset when things don't happen immediately, and so on and so forth. Another one is being vulnerable. Accepting that you've made a mistake. Talking about your own weaknesses. That was something that I certainly resisted in my earlier days. But I've realized that if you actually acknowledge your own weaknesses, it gives permission for the people around you to acknowledge theirs. And if they acknowledge theirs, then they can learn from it and start to put right whatever their weaknesses are. So it's not easy for a lot of people. Again, it requires, it goes back to the emotional intelligence, that you require quite a lot of self-confidence and self-esteem to be able to do those things. So the emotions and the values, they're very much hand in hand. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, I agree. Because even when you were talking about trustworthiness there, I was thinking, to really trust and go with that. Because as you say, if you can trust and give people the benefit of the doubt, most people will come through for you. You will, of course, have the odd experience where people let you down, for so many different reasons. But it takes risk to really trust, and to take risk and to trust really requires vulnerability. So as you say, they really do go hand in hand. Yeah. And if we can't recognize the feelings underneath the values, then it's very difficult to really live truthfully to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other, sorry.
No, go for it, John. Sorry.
I was just going to say, one of the other values that are important for me is also forgiveness. Which, it does have its limits. we're all human beings. But I think that if we can stretch a little bit our forgiveness a little bit further than what is our default, then I think that can be very valuable as well. Give people a second chance, give people even a third chance if necessary. Having said that, when people ask me, what kind of mistakes have I made in my career, occasionally it's been keeping people on for too long where I should have got rid of them. So it does happen the other way too, and they are mistakes, but I'd actually rather make that mistake. But what I have learned from that is that I should have listened to other people as well, rather than making my own decision about whether I should keep somebody or let them go. Because sometimes you can have one person in an organization who's really toxic, and you keep them on for one reason or another. Sometimes it's because you think they're important because of some knowledge or whatever. Sometimes you feel sorry for them. There can be all different reasons, but sometimes that can be one toxic person that you really do need to get rid of. So there is a hard edge. It all sounds touchy-feely, probably what I'm saying, but there is actually a hard edge to it. Sometimes you have to do the tough stuff too.
And John, can you think of any other things that have happened where, you really realized your values were being tested, or that somebody did something that helped you even realize how much more important that value was to you, because maybe they weren't living that value? Have you had those experiences? I'm sure you have over the years.
I mean, one of them was when I decided to leave the corporate world, and the chairman of the company died, and I was given the opportunity to be considered for the next chief executive job, the job as chief executive. But I had to understand that I had to agree with the audited accounts. And what I found out was that the control, this is 40 years ago, but what I found out was that both the merchant bank and the auditors were knowledgeable about things that the board weren't. Only the chairman, who died. And of course, they wanted to protect themselves, so they wanted to appoint a chief executive who would, keep quiet. And so I resigned. It gave me a bad taste at the time about corporate life in general, and that was when I decided to become an entrepreneur, be my own boss. So that was interestingly, at the time, I didn't think about it as an ethical problem, although it was. I just felt intuitively and subconsciously it was the wrong thing to do, and that's not how I was brought up, and therefore I had to get out of it. But I didn't think it through, probably for several years, and in fact that had a negative impact on me for several years, because I also thought, did I do the wrong thing? Was that the best thing for my family, for example? Because our finances were much reduced for quite a while as a result of that decision. Another time.
So there was lots of actual maybe short-term consequences to you making that decision that didn't feel great at the time.
Yes.
However, in the long run, if you had made a different decision and stayed with that organization, there could have been much
I think I would
worse.
I think I would have certainly had the mental health issues in the long term if I had gone long. And the other thing was that my wife supported me 100% of the way, which was also really important. And I didn't have a coach at the time, but I had somebody I could share with, which was really important.
And John, can I dig into something with you there, because I think this is something that comes up a lot, and it's that piece around intuition, which I know that you all wrote about in the first edition of Leading Beyond the Ego, that, you know, there's that rational mind, there's the intuition, and a lot of us might feel like this doesn't feel right, but often because of decisions we've made already, we see things through that don't necessarily bring us where we want to get. And I think that when we talk about intuition or feelings, just to come back to what you said earlier, the talking about your values and how some people might view these things as being soft and fluffy, and I hear that all the time. But yeah, I'd love to just hear your thoughts on finding that balance between the kind of the rational mind and then the intuition and
Yeah.
spiritual intelligence, which you mentioned earlier as well.
Yeah. Well, we have, I mean, the thing that we've developed around the decision making, you know, it has five components. It's the rational process, the intuitive process, instinct,
Mm-hmm.
insights, and ethical philosophy. And I think if by breaking down your decision making into those five components, you can think about when you have made a decision or you are making a decision, which of those components are the most important. And unless something is, you know, there are decisions that one can make that are purely sort of numerical. You know, they're, you know, if something goes up, then the other side has to go down or whatever. You know, it's rational, it's analytical. But most important decisions, you know, like who's going to be your next business partner, or you know, what is going to be your strategy next year, or whatever. Those kind of things cannot be done purely rationally. And in fact, in my experience, most of those decisions are made subconsciously. They may be, and they're based partly on intuition. And intuition, of course, I try to move away from this idea of gut feel because that's too encompassing. You need to split it out into various areas. And intuition is one of them. And intuition is based on your experience. That's what intuition is. It's making a decision based on your experience. And so if you if you start thinking like that, you can start to bring that thinking a little bit closer to your conscious level as to why you're making that decision. Because we all have that sort of feeling about we should make this decision. And then we try to rationalize it. And often we come up with a different decision. Then we find out the decision was wrong. So what is much better is if we go with what that initial thought is, but then try to use our rational brain to understand and unpack it. Where is it coming from? Is it coming from our memory? Have we had experiences like this before? Or is it just instinct? Is it something that's just, you know, human nature? Or is it my values, my ethical philosophy? You know, in the ethical philosophy, you can break down quite simply into three areas. One is, am I breaking the rules? What's my personal conscience? What is ethical? What is the integrity thing to do? And we all have a preference of one of those three, actually. I mean, not to 100% one or the other, but we have a preference to one. My preference was always on the integrity side rather than the rules. I broke lots of rules. I didn't seem to think they were too important. You know, if they didn't feel that it was the ethical thing to do, then the rule wasn't important. That was my thinking anyway. And on the social conscience, that was something that I had to learn to build because I wasn't particularly empathetic. I didn't particularly think about the consequences of other people as much as I should have done. So that's the way I go about thinking about making decisions. And I feel that even if I don't always make the right decision, but I feel more comfortable with the decision. I feel that I made the decision for the right reasons.
So it sounds like, John, you have really learned to slow things down, reflect, surface what's going on inside you before you make decisions. And it feels sometimes that the world that we're living in, we're all moving so quickly. There's so much happening, so much information coming at us that I find this all the time, that people don't know how to take that reflection time. For me, even personally,
Absolutely,
I've
you're
had
right.
to practice taking reflection time, and
Yes.
because it just doesn't come naturally to,
No,
I think, the
absolutely.
majority of us.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that's a really good point that reflection is really important. I mean, there are people who sort of reflect forever and never make a decision. So, I mean, there
True.
are other, but
Yeah,
most
there are extremes.
yeah, but the majority of people in leadership positions are there because if whether it's their ethical or not, they're good at making decisions. I mean, that's one of the ways that people tend
Mm,
to float to the top is being able to make decisions. But I
mhm,
think quite often we make
mm,
decisions quicker than we need to. We don't actually
mhm, mhm,
reflect and think about it. Um,
mhm.
and I've
And
learned,
sometimes all it needs is an extra 60 seconds
yeah,
to
absolutely,
surface what's going on.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also I found that quite often, for me anyway, I'd like to make the decision right now, but I ask
Mhm,
myself, do I need to make that decision now? Can it wait till tomorrow? Can I
mhm,
sleep on it? Can I,
mhm,
think about it in the
mhm,
shower or whatever? And bring all those components that we've talked about to the surface. But it's really
mhm.
about using your rational brain to to unpack the subconscious rather than using your rational brain to make the decision.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really important question. I've written it down. Do I need to make this decision now? Um, because it means putting off things that
Yeah,
we could take action on now. And then I
yeah,
think sometimes the fear is, well, if I don't make a decision now, things are I'm going to feel overwhelmed tomorrow. There's going to be too much going on.
yeah,
However, if we take that time, we often see
yeah,
it from a new perspective.
yeah.
And
And
John,
if we do have to make a sorry, if we do have to make a
yeah,
decision quickly, then we use our intuition anyway because we haven't got time to think about it rationally.
it's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. um, John, I was thinking let's just take a few questions from our audience that are here live with us, and I'm going to stop the recording here. Bear with
Sure.
me. Thank you so much to John Knights at Leadership Global for joining us today. It was a great conversation. Maybe we can help you depending on what you're looking to achieve in your organization. We work with individuals, teams, and organizations, and we partner with wonderful organizations such as Leadership Global and many others to help organizations, teams, and individuals develop high performance that is sustainable. And that is what makes all the difference. So we'll see you for the next Cascading Growth event. I look forward to it.